Should we get started and make it 4:15? Thank you everyone for joining us at this slightly later time than scheduled. I'm pleased you're all able to make it. And welcome today to Unlocking Potential for Learners with SEND. Really happy to have Georgina Durrant with us today. I will introduce you all to her in a minute. Just a bit of housekeeping to begin with. Just to let you know, the chat box is off, so you can't use that. But you can please do use our Q&A box. So please, as we're going, put any questions in there and Georgina will answer those at the end. We'll have a bit of time for questions at the end and we'll go through those, okay? I just mentioned the webinar is being recorded. So this will automatically be sent to anyone who registered tomorrow. So if you're on and you're watching, please don't feel you've got to take copious amounts of notes because it's being recorded. It will be sent to you tomorrow, and you can reflect and revisit, hopefully. I'll just start by introducing myself. I'm Sarah. I'm actually one of the account managers at Educake, but I had a long past life as a teacher, and I taught a range of diverse needs, from primary right through to FE. And I had a soft spot for SEND, I'll be honest. I actually taught, my last role before joining Educake was teaching functional skills at a local college. And the course I taught on was a stepping stone course that gave those students who'd struggled at secondary school, so they might have had SEMH or neurodivergence, anything like that. It gave them that opportunity to have another go at education in a nurturing environment, with the pressure taken off. So we focused on getting them those functional skills qualifications and then allowed them to then move on to GCSE retakes. So I've seen sort of the other end of how secondary school doesn't work for some students, because with the best one in the world, my students fell through the cracks, despite the best efforts of their teachers. But aside from that, professionally, I would also consider myself to be a SEND parent, as much as we love that label. I see it from the other side. I've got a wonderful 10-year-old son who has a variety of needs, and I have to continually advocate for those needs at school. And I'm in a position at the moment where we've got to choose his secondary school. And really on the fence actually about special school or mainstream. I'm visiting a lot of schools at the moment, which helps because I've got that professional insight as well. But yeah, my son finds the classroom a struggle at times, I'll be honest. And I have to work with his teachers. So this is coming at a great time for me, I've got to be honest. And I'm really interested to hear everything that Georgina has to say. So I am thrilled to be joined today by a guest who is a true champion for inclusive education and someone who I know has had a very busy couple of weeks. So we're actually really lucky that she's been able to squeeze us in between translating the white paper for everybody, and speaking to journalists and ministers, I believe, Georgina. She's a former teacher and SENDCO herself, a multi-award winning author and the founder of the SEN Resources blog. Currently, she serves as Twinkle's National Inclusion Lead. How does she get the time to do all this, right? I don't know. And she works tirelessly for Twinkle to ensure every child has the support they need to thrive. We're catching Georgina at an incredibly exciting time as well, because obviously not just because of the white paper, I mean, I'm sure it'll come up, but her brand new book, SEND Strategies for the Secondary Years, is officially hitting the shelves, I think next Thursday, March the 12th, providing much needed practical advice for those crucial teenage years. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to the wonderful Georgina Durrant. Thank you for joining us, Georgina.
Thank you. I
Nice
feel
to
like I
see
need to
you.
blush a little bit from that introduction.
Not at
You're being too
all.
kind. Thank you very so much for having me on
It
here.
wasn't difficult to put together. It was actually quite hard to put into one paragraph. You're so busy. It's so great to have you here. How are you doing?
Yeah, really good. It's been, like you say, it's been a very busy week, but
Yeah.
I don't think anyone will have any sympathy for me because these are secondary teachers who have also had a very busy week and have had a very busy term. So I won't say my sob story of how busy I've been because we were all busy. But yeah, there's been a lot of change, hasn't there, over the last week, or proposed changes in the white paper. So yeah, it's been a bit of a whirlwind, shall we say,
Mm.
recently.
Lots to take in. Yeah. I wanted to start today though by sort of going back actually to your beginnings, and ask you what first drew you to focus so strongly on supporting young people with SEND in the secondary phase.
Yeah, so I'll start by what drew me to want to be in the secondary, like a secondary school teacher initially, because I didn't think I was going to be a secondary school teacher. So I've got an interesting, well, I find it interesting. People might not find it interesting, but an interesting sort of way of how I became a teacher. I wanted to be a doctor originally, and I went to university and was doing medical sciences. And for my dissertation, we had an option of doing some lab-based work or this like curveball of a dissertation that was you can go into an inner city school and do drug education. And I'm quite chatty, I'm quite sociable. The idea of being in a lab wouldn't have, I'm also very clumsy, Sarah, so it wouldn't have suited me. I wasn't great in the lab. So I said, oh, I think I'll choose the option where we can go into a school and that sounds fun. And I'm sure if a teacher like the teachers listen to this will appreciate it. But you know, that moment I was stood in front, I know what I was teaching because, you know, I was a university student. I was stood in front of some year 11s in an inner city school and I wasn't really teaching drug education. I was just presenting some stuff. There was no teaching really involved. I was trying my best. But, you know, that moment you get when you're like, oh my goodness, this is really fun and this is what I want to be doing. It was like that buzz. And I thought, oh, that's what I need to be doing this. This is brilliant. And I just really enjoyed it so, so much. And yeah, and then changed my mind and decided that's what I wanted to do, which was fun. And then from there, I think it must have been in like my first or second year of teaching. I realized the children that I was wanting to teach more with, well, not teach more, but the ones I wanted to support more were the ones who had SEND, who were struggling more, who needed that extra support. And I remember going to my head teacher as a very early career teacher, saying, "Can I be the SENDCO one day?" And he was like, "Well, just like let's just calm down, Georgina. Like, it's like way too much of it." And I just was desperate for that role, and eventually I got it in a different school. But yeah, I absolutely loved working with children with SEND in secondary, and it was absolutely brilliant. You know, but I think as well, it's such an important time as secondary, isn't it? The pace, the sensory load, like it suddenly becomes really complex socially for children. There's all this expectation about suddenly in year 7 being able to be a lot more independent than you were like 6 weeks ago in year 6. It all ramps up really, really quickly through nobody's fault, but it just does. And I think, unlike in primary, where you've got that one teacher who knows you really, really
Yeah.
well, inside and out, you know, secondary can feel a bit fragmented, it can feel a bit less personal. It's brilliant. But I think for some learners with SEND, it can be particularly challenging. And that sort of
Mhm.
transition can be difficult. And I think, yeah, there's also lots of children in secondary, if they've been masking in primary, they might sort of mask even more in secondary, or they might just suddenly start masking because it's becoming a little bit more tricky. You know, there's anxiety can spike, there's throwing in some hormones as well, aren't we? And yeah, I think it's when some of the difficulties that might have been manageable in primary suddenly become overwhelming for certain learners. And I think
Mm.
that sort of combination of sort of vulnerability, that untapped potential that they want to, yeah, was why I really wanted to focus that area. And I wanted to help sort of create environments and lessons that enable them not just to survive in secondary school, but thrive in it and like get the most
Yeah.
out of it and enjoy it. Because I think there's so much talk of, oh, we're meeting the child's needs, and I don't think meeting the needs is what we should be aiming for. It should be really for all children to be really thriving and happy in secondary school.
Definitely. It's that transition away from the nurturing environment, like I mentioned, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And they're going into different environments throughout one day. They're not just
Yes.
in that one place that they feel safe, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's the busy corridors, it's the subject-specific vocabulary, isn't it? Because it's like a whole different language you're learning in different lessons. You know, you just take science and you think of all the key words that you learn in year 7 in science, and then you go to English and you've got all the new ones there. You know, when you add all that together, that's a lot of extra vocabulary they've got to learn, as well as all that sort of social complexity on the side. It's really a really challenging
Yeah.
time, a wonderful time, don't get me wrong. And I think secondary colleagues are absolutely fantastic, and the secondary schools are wonderful, but it can be really challenging for lots of children.
And for families and schools, it can be challenging.
Yes.
Um, how would you, in terms of the SEND landscape, then
Yes.
obviously it's changing, hopefully, possibly. How would you characterize the reality that people are facing right now?
Yeah, I think got a system full of absolutely dedicated, compassionate people, teachers, support staff, parents, carers, lots of people working incredibly hard. But we're trying to meet increasing complex needs, aren't we? With fewer resources, longer waiting times for assessments, all of these difficult problems. And I think, families are often, and the children themselves are navigating years of assessments, of appeals, perhaps, of uncertainty. And all at the same time that learner might be struggling every single day. And I think that can be really hard when you're like you said, you're a SEND parent yourself, so you'll know this well, but like when you're fighting it yourself, but the child is in the midst of it, they're still going to school each day, they're still struggling whilst you're trying to fight for more. And schools are doing a brilliant job, but they're juggling, aren't they? These rising demands, the limited funding, the expectations, staff really stretched thin, trying to provide personalised support in environments. And I think it's a real challenge. And I think the white paper, I've obviously read it. I think there's some good suggestions in it, but I am a little bit worried about how much again is going to land on the lap of the SENCOs and the teachers and the workload that's going to go alongside that. So one of the proposals is around, and they are proposals, we must emphasize that nothing is policy yet, they're just proposals. But one of them is around individual support plans. And we know lots of schools already have individual support plans, but making them sort of mandatory for all children with SEND. And you think at first, you read that and you think, oh, brilliant, that's actually a really good idea. But then you think, oh, but how do we manage that in schools? That's going to be really challenging to maintain them, and then it says around the legal side of them, so there's going to be a legal backing to these ISPs. But then again, the legal backing of that is the complaints procedures to schools. So again, it falls on schools, and that does worry me because I've been a secondary SENCO. I know how ridiculous the job is in terms of hours and workload, and I imagine it's got even bigger. And if you add that on there, I think I could be doing them a disservice. Maybe it will work, but I do have some concerns about how we make sure we look after the workforce whilst we're putting in these new
it's got to come with that as well, hasn't it? Definitely.
And I think it's just hard, isn't it? There's all of I think the other thing is the trust, that because the system hasn't worked as we wanted it to. I think the trust between families and schools and the local authority, there's not much trust around in the system and how it's going to work. So even if the government suggests some fantastic things and they get implemented, it's how do we get that trust back and how do we get that relationship? And some schools are absolutely fantastic with the relationship with home and with school and making sure parents are fully involved. But it can be really difficult if the families are not trusting you and coming from that sort of fight.
Definitely.
Still,
because if you get that disconnect, then you can't support the whole child.
Exactly.
Because you're only dealing with the child when you see them, as opposed to it's tough. But then communication takes time as well.
Exactly. That's the other thing that's another thing, is landing all on the school, isn't it? So
it's hard. Let's talk a bit about your book for a second then. I'd love to know what inspired you to write it. So where did you start from, and what do you hope it offers to people who are supporting young people with SEND?
Yeah, so I wrote the primary one first. You can see them in the background, by the way, just strategically
Very colourful.
So I wanted to write the secondary one first, but Bloomsbury quite rightly said it makes more logical sense to do a primary one than a secondary rather than the other way around. So I'll let them off. But the reason I wrote it was I don't know how this happened, Sarah, but I ended up in a parliamentary roundtable, which was fun. And before I went on it, I was a little bit nervous about going on it. And it was to do with SEND, obviously, and sort of the waiting lists and to do with dyslexia assessments and etc. Right. Before I went on, I put on social media, like, I'm about to go on this parliamentary roundtable. Is there anything people would like me to say, like to represent you? What stories do you have? What do you want me to say? And as you can imagine, I was absolutely inundated with people messaging saying, teachers, families being like, working for my child, we've been waiting 5 years for an autism diagnosis, and somebody else saying we've been waiting for an EHCP and it hasn't gone through, and SENDCO saying how the workload was ridiculous and we're trying to get all of these children to get an EHCP and it's not working and blah, blah, blah. So there's so much. And it sort of lit this fight. I got really angry, Sarah, when like you realise your purpose, and I felt really cross the system was letting, and this was a few years ago, and that it was really letting people down, and not just the children, but the teachers and the SENCOs and the families, and so many people were being let down by it, and that they needed more support. And I was thinking, well, I can't change the system. Like I'd love to, but realistically, I can't. So I was thinking, right, I can't change the system. What can I physically do to help? Because I felt like I needed to do something. And I'd written two books before that, and I thought, oh, I could write another book. And maybe it could be things that you can do right now. So even if the system was never fixed, and as it happened, it hasn't been yet, even though I wrote those books quite a while ago. Um, Even if it hadn't have been fixed, like what can you do right now? And I think teachers are great at this, aren't we? Like you've got the children in front of you. It doesn't really matter what the government's saying. It doesn't really matter
Mhm.
if they've got a diagnosis or not. If you've got a child in front of you with a specific area of need, what can you do that day to support them? So it's coming from like a sort of practical, what we can do despite everything else that's going on sort of stance. So it goes through the various areas. Both books go through the various sort of areas of need that you might see in the classrooms, not diagnosis, because I didn't want anyone sort of accidentally diagnosing someone or presuming a diagnosis, but
Yeah.
goes through areas of need, gives you a little bit of information about it, and then gives you practical strategies that you can literally use the next day to put in place to support learners
Oh,
with that need.
amazing.
So then, yeah, hopefully it helps a little bit. And yeah, I
That
can.
sounds fantastic. So for everyday teachers, not even SENCOs
No,
necessarily,
it's
just teachers
everyday
who
teachers
know
and
their kids.
parents. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I've split it as well because so that there's strategies. So in the secondary one, with the primary one, it's got strategies at home, strategies at school, but then the secondary one's got like strategies for school as a whole, so for leaders in the classroom specifically, and then at home, but also out and about because let's be realistic, like teenagers don't often just, well, they might be at home on a PlayStation 5, but they're also out and about, aren't they? So how we can
Yeah.
support them realistically with their sort of whole life, not just the bit that we're
Amazing.
involved in, was the
Oh, that sounds
plan
really great.
mainly. Thank you.
Fantastic. So we talked a bit about the system. We talked a few times about the system, and you talked about how your books are kind of trying to almost rise above that, really, and focus on what's happening in the
Yeah.
classroom. But with the system under pressure,
Yeah.
what mindset shift do you think helps teachers and parents feel more empowered rather than helpless?
Yeah, I think knowing that, and it is small tweaks. It's not loads of. Obviously, funding would be great. I'm not
Yeah.
going to say it wouldn't be, and resources would be brilliant, wouldn't it? And more teaching assistants and more staff, all of that would be great. But there are also lots of small tweaks we can do in the classroom that and at home that can make a huge difference to individual children. And I think when in the books, one of the things I did was I spoke to a lot of SENCO, spoke to a lot of teachers, spoke to a lot of children and adults with lived experience of SEND. And that was really interesting. It's often they often remember one particular teacher that did just some small, well, not they're not small to them, but probably to the teacher probably is unaware they even did it. Some really
Mm,
small little tweaks that made such a difference to their entire life. And I think we forget our purpose as teachers. Like we can you can really change someone's life, like genuinely, by just doing
mm,
some small little tweaks, just being that person that makes going to school so much easier for a student. And I think, yeah, that can empower you and make you feel your purpose because when everything's going on with the workload pressures that teachers are facing, I think we forget, don't we, why we've come into it and what the reason we wanted to come into it for. And yeah,
yeah.
hearing about the difference some teachers have made to learners is huge. And I wish the teachers would know it was them when I was here. You know, when you're
Oh,
reading
that's
it, you're
the
like, oh, I
thing.
bet
Yeah.
that teacher doesn't even know they made that massive
Yeah.
difference. They'll
Years
never know.
later.
But yeah, those small
Oh,
things, just like things like just having a calm presence in the classroom for like a neurodivergent child who finds the rest of the day completely overwhelming, but they come to your classroom and you have a calm manner and that makes their day and they maybe they learn from that that's what they need and that helps them throughout their entire life. And it doesn't sound like a lot, but it's massive. Or it might be, the willingness to adapt, or they do something slightly different in the classroom that other teachers haven't done, and that makes a massive difference to them. Or
mhm.
just something as simple as believing in them, believing that they can achieve something more than other people think they can, or that they think they can. That can that can I'm going to get emotional, but it genuinely can change lives, can't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah.
It can make because you remember, I'm sure all of us, when you think of, you've got a teacher in your head, when you think of school and you think of a teacher that made a difference to you, we've probably all got that teacher in our head that made a difference to us. And yeah, to think like people who are listening, that's probably you for somebody. I think it's quite powerful. So yeah, having that in your head and realizing you're doing such an important job, not just for those school years, but for their entire life. I think is
And
huge.
it will stay with them, won't it?
Yeah,
Definitely. I love how you talk about needs as opposed to diagnoses, because
yeah.
obviously we all know about the ridiculous waiting lists. I think my son's been on a waiting list for 5 years now for a
Oh,
diagnosis. It's just, but you hear about this, don't you? It's so normal. Um, but what I think good teachers do is respond to those needs
yeah.
rather than saying, oh, we're waiting for that diagnosis, it might be that, or that is a diagnosis, I'm going to respond to that. Why do you think the approach to needs is so important,
Yeah, I
especially in
feel like you've
secondary
answered it
settings?
for me, Sarah. I
Yeah.
completely agree. I think because we can't wait for assessment times. Like I heard of a girl who started in reception. Parents flagged they thought she could potentially be autistic, and she had a few signs. And it wasn't until the end of primary school that she got her diagnosis. And you think if those and they
Yeah.
hadn't, thankfully, but if those teachers had waited to get a diagnosis, that child would not have been supported for the entire of primary school.
Mm.
So we can't. Like the system isn't set up for us to not work on needs now. And I think, diagnosis can be great for children so they can understand themselves. And we know that from, autistic adults and adults with ADHD who've had a diagnosis and it's made them make sense of their life a little bit more. And I think it does have an importance, does diagnosis. But we're in the reality we're in, we can't wait for that. And I think as well, we have to be careful that we don't think you get a diagnosis and then you think you know what to do. So I don't know, a child gets the
Exactly.
diagnosis of autism.
Yeah.
All children are unique and all autistic children will be unique. So we need to remember that it doesn't necessarily give you all the information that you think you're going to get from it.
Yeah.
Whereas the needs in front of you is what we need to be looking at. So
Mm.
yeah, and I think especially in secondary when the pace is so fast, isn't it? And the stakes are really high as well. Like we can't get it wrong for these children because they're
Yeah.
going out into the real world.
Yeah.
And they shouldn't have to struggle before they're receiving support. And also we see as well, like I think we talk about like early identification and support, and we often think, oh, that just applies to primary school. But timely support is whenever the sort of the needs arise. Sometimes a child might be coping brilliantly in primary school, and it's not secondary school's fault that they're struggling when they arrive at secondary, but it might all unravel in secondary. Hormones can have massive effects on like ADHD symptoms, for example, or it could just be that the demands and the sensory environment and all of that
Mm.
makes it just too difficult for them in secondary school. And yeah, if you then noticed it and then waited for a diagnosis, yeah, with those children would potentially have
Yeah.
escalated too much, and we wouldn't have been able to support them. So yeah, I think and also I think if you're looking at needs, it's much more inclusive because it doesn't rely on if someone's noticed them and been able to get a diagnosis, or if their family's been able to help support them privately, which we know some parents have
Of
had to.
course.
It makes it more equal if we're looking at needs, and it makes it just a more inclusive culture. And I think ideally, in an ideal world, it would be lovely for children to be able to sort of advocate for themselves, to know that everybody has different needs and think, okay, today so and so needs to use a standing, I know I'm talking blue sky here, but be able to
Yeah.
use a standing desk today because that suits them. And then when they're older, that child, it might be in an office and they think, oh, yeah, standing desk is really helpful for me. And that's part of my sort of toolkit of sort of coping.
Hmm.
And I think having these things accessible for children to be able to use throughout the day or whenever they need to, it sort of reduces that stigma around it, and it makes support more sort of proactive rather than reactive. And I think we've got to be realistic as well that a lot of these strategies that we're suggesting, they're not, I'm not reinventing the wheel at all. But things like clear instructions, visual support, flexible seating, all of those things can benefit so many more students than you realise in the classroom. Ones that have gone under the radar entirely, you could do that and it could make a massive impact to somebody you had no idea had some extra needs and needed some extra support. So yeah, a win for everybody, I think, if we
Definitely.
respond to needs and just make it more inclusive in general.
Yeah. And I think that's the ideal world, isn't it? That universal offer. But I
Absolutely.
suppose, and this is an area where I have less experience really, but I think teachers in secondary settings have got an even harder job in some
Yeah,
ways than a primary teacher because they see hundreds of different students each
yeah,
week. So let's say within those hundreds of different students, and you've just had that 1 hour touch point with that particular student, how can you spot subtle signs that a young person might be struggling in your
yeah,
class if you only get that touch point once a
yeah.
week?
No, it's a really good question. And I think in all honesty, you probably don't spot all of them and you probably there will be some, but I think by having that universal offer and having lots, if you're able to, that, making it as inclusive as you can, it doesn't matter too much if because you're not going to miss them. You catch all of them, if you see what I mean, by having that sort of inclusive classroom. And but there are things you can look out for, obviously, and we should as teachers be aware of them and then talk to the SENDCO if we spot anything. So I think being able to be a little bit of a detective and thinking about looking at patterns, if there's a child that's always avoiding group work, maybe someone who forgets equipment all the time. And we sometimes joke about these, they're always forgetting their equipment, but actually, is there a reason they're always forgetting their equipment? Is it sort of executive functioning difficulty and we need to support them a little bit more? Or maybe during written tasks, they're becoming particularly like disengaged and look exhausted. Are they bored, or is it actually that it's the cognitive demand for it is too high, or their literacy levels are struggling with their literacy skills, or maybe they've got fine motor difficulties and they're really struggling holding that pen and the hand strength for such a long time writing. So I think we need to be detectives as well as everything else. Sorry, guys. Detectives as well. But yeah, really, I think the main, because I do appreciate it is incredibly difficult with so many students throughout the day. You're teaching hundreds, aren't you? I think just making sure that you've got that sort of universal offering as best you can. So then you're making sure you're catching as many children as you can in that, not literally catching anybody. um, but also talking to each other, talking to colleagues. I think, some of the conversations you have in the staff room are often the ones that make the biggest difference. Like
Yes,
just
putting that jigsaw
noticing.
together.
Yeah, noticing like
Yeah.
similar things, is it worth exploring this further? And did you notice that? And just sort of having that ethos of being curious and chatting to others and discussing it and seeing if we can find solutions and not, I think the schools that work really well are the ones that aren't the ones where, oh, they behave brilliantly in my class and not in your, there's always been that teacher that says to you, oh, they work well for me. And you think, oh, great. What am I doing
What
wrong?
is that though? What are you
Exactly, but being
doing?
more open and saying, "Oh, I
Yeah.
tried this and this worked with this. Have you tried doing that?" And that's sort of not, yeah, that, and it's a difficult balance to get, isn't it? But sort of making it so people feel able to say when they're struggling with a class or a particular child, and then how others are finding it more manageable and what they might be doing to support them, and sharing of ideas, I think can be really helpful. But just trusting your instincts as well. Like, teachers are brilliant. You spot these things and you know these things, and
Mm.
trusting that gut instinct that something might need a little bit of extra support is really worth paying attention to. I think another thing is young people, as we know, often communicate struggles through behaviour, and if behaviour is changing or there doesn't seem to be a reason for it, maybe sort of looking into that a little bit difficult, a bit more. But I know that's tricky because often behaviour can feel like they're doing it to us, can't it? And I've been there, I get it. You've got a
Yeah.
class, and if they're misbehaving, it can feel like it's directed at us. But sometimes it's often easier, isn't it, to be the class clown, if you like, and misbehave in a lesson than it is to say, actually, I'm struggling and I can't do this piece of
So,
work. So spotting
yeah.
those children,
Gosh, I've been there.
yeah, it brings
Takes
it
me
all back,
back.
doesn't
Makes me
it?
have flashbacks. So if you were back to that universal offer, because I find
Yeah,
this really fascinating, the idea that you could, like you say, catch lots of students'
yeah.
needs. If you were to walk into a classroom with a strong universal offer, what would that look like? What would you see, do you think?
Yeah, I think firstly, visuals. I think visuals are underrated. We often think it's a primary thing, and visuals don't have to be anything fancy. I know at Twinkle we've got symbols, which are great. They can be really useful, but it can just be photographs of the or some sort of symbol of what you're talking about. I think visuals can be really helpful for more children than we probably even realise, and adults too.
I
Like
was
I
going to
see,
say, I love visuals.
yeah, some people love a diagram. It can be really
Yeah.
helpful. So, yeah, visuals can be great. I think another one is movement breaks. Now, I'm not suggesting before everyone logs off and thinks we can't do movement breaks in secondary, Georgina. Don't be ridiculous. We're not doing star jumps in the corner. We can't we can't do that. Not suggesting that at all. But things like if you've got a student in the lesson who's wanting to get out of the seat more and not staying in their seat as much as you want them to and struggling to sit still, giving them the opportunity to move around the classroom can sometimes be helpful. And obviously
Mm.
use your judgment here, but getting them to hand out the books, getting them to assist you a little bit more so they have that movement can then help them concentrate. So I think things like that can be helpful. But in an ideal world, it would be lovely if you can, I've seen this in schools where they have like a toolbox, if you like, of the resources as well that they can use, if you've got, if funds allow, having laptops to be able to access it, so then children can work out who needs to use the, a different word processor, if that would help them. But or visuals or fidgets. Fidgets can be a little bit of a contentious one, I'm aware, so I won't talk too much about that one. But I think as well, things we can do is giving time. So time to answer questions can just make your questioning so much more accessible. Somebody told me we should be waiting 10 seconds after you ask a question for people to answer it, to allow everybody to actually be able to process the information. Now, 10 seconds is a very long time when you're stood in front of a class. So I appreciate it might not be the full 10 seconds, but giving just a little bit more time, maybe just one more second than you normally do, can mean more children can access what you're actually asking them. Chunking instructions, so making them into, not a long piece of text, but chunking them into sections or any sort of text, chunking it information. And then just being sort of giving options, if you can, of how to participate, how to answer questions, how to physically do the work. Maybe sometimes having quiet time. So for those learners that find working in silence or quiet much easier, having some time so they're able to do that. For others, having a little bit of noise so that it's more accessible for them. I think it's really about being flexible and but also asking the kids, because let's face it, they're teenagers. Let's let them advocate for themselves, because we want them to be adults that eventually can advocate for themselves as well. We can ask them as like a whole school, like what helps them learn, what can we be doing to help them.
Mm.
I think routines, I could go on for ages because there's a whole book on this.
I love it.
But routines are really helpful. We do, primary colleagues do that a lot. Just saying
Yeah.
what's going to happen in a lesson, having it on the wall somewhere, this and this and this and this can be really helpful. Tick them off, then they know where they're up to and what's going to happen. Because there will be some some learners in the classroom that don't have a concept of the time and when they're going to be moving to the next bit. And it can be hard if you're struggling with something to keep going at something when you don't know when it's going to end. So I
Yeah.
think
But
giving
also that can
time.
reduce anxiety as well, because they know there aren't any surprises coming up. This
Yes,
is what will be
exactly.
expected of you in this
Yeah,
lesson. There aren't any pop quizzes or anything like that.
yeah,
Yeah, it's just
yeah.
yeah. Oh,
And
fantastic.
yeah, and sort of like, and also, yeah, not putting too much pressure on them in the way they answer questions and participate, because that can be, for some, there
Mm.
might be a learner in your classroom who is absolutely terrified of answering out loud questions, and they are not able to access the lesson because they're too worried about putting their hand up or being asked to answer a question, that they're not learning as much as they could. So having different ways to join in and participate, or just that minute to talk to a peer next to them before they then give the answer,
Mm.
or jotting it down next to them, or repeating instructions and jotting it on a post-it note next to them. There's so many different things. They're all in the book. I won't,
Sounds
I won't
great.
go into it
Amazing.
now.
I might be making you repeat yourself a bit here, but I'm quite interested in regulation, and
Yeah,
you talked about how behaviour is communication,
yeah,
and I think if we pull in sort of sensory needs, that can lead to dysregulation, can't
yeah,
it? And we know that schools are very fast-paced places. If you suffer from sensory overload, that can lead to dysregulation. What do you have any tips on, I'm sure you do, on how
absolutely.
teachers can support emotional and sensory regulation in such a busy, fast-paced environment?
Yeah, I think secondary schools can be an absolute sensory nightmare for a lot of neurodivergent children, if
Mm.
I'm being completely honest. There's a whole chapter in the book on sensory. It was interesting talking to different schools to see what they do differently. So there was one school, one sort of common theme was the school bell being a real sensory nightmare for a lot of children.
Yeah.
That sort of abrupt, very loud noise, meaning they've then got to go to the next lesson, could be really
Mm.
challenging for a lot. And I know as a classroom teacher, you might not be able to sort this out if you're watching this, but it might be something to talk to SLT about. But what some schools are doing some really cool things. One school just got rid of the school bell and nothing happened. It was fine. Like, turns out we don't need them. Like, you can actually remember to go to the next lesson. Everybody managed, which I thought was really cool. But then there were other ones where they got like student council involved, and they had neurodivergent children who were in there, and they spoke about what they could do instead of the bell and like some alternatives, and some recorded like little messages like, go to your next lesson please, instead of the school bell, or chose some like different music, like a little jingle instead of the bell, which was a bit more gentler to go to the next lesson. So there's some schools doing some really cool stuff around the school
Yeah,
bell. I like that a
excellent.
lot. But yeah, I think
Definitely.
sensory, my biggest suggestion would be going back into your classroom tomorrow and just thinking from like a sensory audit almost, and think what in this room could
Mm.
be a problem for somebody who finds sensory stimulus a little bit more overwhelming than perhaps you do. And it's tricky because we all experience the world differently. And something that you're fine with can be really, really dysregulating for somebody else. So the projector hum, for example, can be, the whiteboard, like hum of electricity in your
Oh,
classroom can be
yeah.
really distracting. It could be that they're next to the corridor and sometimes people walk down it and that can be disruptive for them. It could be the light shining through the window. There's loads of different things. And I think just being aware of that and then thinking about which learners might be struggling with the sensory environment can be helpful. So it can be something as simple as you realize that in the afternoon the sun is actually coming through your window and into the eyes of the back row of your class, and then thinking strategically who, if that person's actually, if maybe that's influencing them a little bit and they're finding it a little bit more difficult, maybe we could just move them. Or thinking there's a bit of a thoroughfare when they're coming to, I don't know if you're in a science classroom. I was a science teacher, which is why I keep mentioning science, but in practicals, if they're having to move around a lot, maybe not having the children that get disrupted by the sensory movement of people moving around them, not having them on the end and having them against the wall, if you like. So just being a little bit strategic about where you're placing them. And I think as well, we need to remember corridors. That's probably the worst sensory part of the day for a lot of our learners, like narrow
Mm.
corridors, really busy, lots of people bustling, knocking into them. All of that can be really difficult. So, giving lesson passes for them to leave early so they can get through that mayhem before the rest of the class. That can be really helpful. Um, a tricky one, but being mindful of noise levels to make it sort of calmer for everybody in the classroom. Yeah, there's loads. But even small changes. There was a teenager I spoke to, and he said one thing his teacher did really well that made a massive, and again, a massive difference, and it sounds small, was they just told him before they were going to move the tables. So if anyone's moved tape, and you've all done it, moved a table in a secondary classroom, and that awful noise of moving
Oh, the
tables and
scraping.
chairs,
Yeah,
yeah,
of
he found that
course.
completely dysregulating. Like his behaviour
Oh,
would be off for the rest of the day. All his teacher had to do was say, I won't use the name, but hey, so and so, we're all going to move the tables in a minute. Do you want to just step outside for a second, or do you want to put your hands up? Like, yeah, just gave him a warning of it, and that made a massive difference. And that wasn't
mm,
that he wasn't having a big sensory break. He wasn't going to there was nothing like that. It was just that noise was really, really triggering for him, and they made a tiny, small tweak by just giving advance warning, and that
yeah. But
that
it's
changed
finding
things.
that out, isn't it?
Yeah,
And I suppose that's the other way we can get these young people involved is actually to sort of get them to do their own sensory audits
yes,
and sort
get
of
them
say,
to,
what is there anything in this space that is triggering you? Is there anything
yeah,
that is bothering you?
yeah,
Look around, what can you hear, see, feel?
yeah.
That kind of thing, I suppose, would be
Completely. I
interesting.
think I
Yeah.
think back to when I was like well, it was an NQT that then I'm showing my age, but not an early career teacher, but an NQT. And I remember spending one evening in my science classroom thinking I'm going to print all these pictures off, going to make my wall look amazing
Yeah,
with all these science. It was probably so overstimulating
yeah.
to neurodivergent children. I feel awful I did it.
So,
But so it's things like
yeah.
that, just looking at your classroom and thinking, do I need all of this stuff on the wall? Is
Is it
there any actual
necessary?
benefit, or can we just
Mm,
pull it
mm.
all back, make it a lot simpler and easier to focus? Because we're the same at home. If you had loads of stuff on your walls and you were trying to work, it might be a little bit more challenging.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Yeah, that's so true. It's taking that step back, isn't it, and seeing it from another angle.
Yeah, and thinking of, sorry, and you've got me
Sorry.
talking, Sarah.
I love
But
it.
I
Keep
was
going.
thinking as well, it's also like needs fluctuate throughout the day as well. So
Of
we all know
course.
after lunchtime is more challenging, isn't it, to teach Friday
Yeah.
after lunch? Nobody wants that slot. But some children can get, or some students can get more anxious, more tired, or I don't know, they've had some sugary lunch. Like lots of things can
Mm,
influence um, how they can respond to the sensory environment, but also how they can regulate their emotions and how they can manage things. So I think being aware of that as a school can be really helpful, especially if anyone's involved in timetabling, thinking about how we can sort out the timetable to make it more, yeah, easy, not easier on the teachers, but better for the learners in the classrooms, because then they're learning more, aren't they? And they're able to
mm, mm.
access it better.
Yeah, it's removing those barriers that just shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
Definitely. Um, So back to your book because I want to hear more about it. You talked about how you've got some insights in there from young people and adults with lived experience. When you sort of think about the book as a whole and you put all of those lived experiences together, what themes or lessons are standing out most strongly to you? What should we expect to sort of see in this SEND landscape from your experience?
Yeah. Oh, they're so lovely. I'm so grateful for them all contributing. It really makes the book. So each sort of chapter, it tells you the area of need, like speech and language, for example, or sensory, and then it gives you a case study of either a teenager at the moment. So we've got some teenagers who are still in school who are talking about their current school and what they're finding difficult and what they're finding easy, who's helping them, like what, all of that sort of stuff. And then some adults who are talking, reflecting on their time at secondary school and what made it challenging, what made it good, what things really helped them, what things didn't. And I think the biggest, well, there's probably two big themes. One of them was being understood early, like people actually understanding them. I think teenagers really want to be understood, don't they? They know who understands them and who gets them. Um, and that sort of relief of people getting them and understanding them and being accepting them for who they are, and that exhaustion of masking to fit in. It's quite sad to read. But and how transformative it would have been. Some have had good experiences, obviously some haven't. But like how transformative it would have been if they'd have been noticed it early and if they'd put some stuff in earlier and recognized that it needs earlier or made some small adjustments. And then, like I said earlier, there's some lovely stories of where somebody has actually identified them early and helped support them and done that small tweak in the lesson that made a lot of things a lot easier for them. And that, I think the second theme is probably the importance of relationships. And we forget, I don't know if we do forget, but in primary, there's a lot of focus on the relationship with the teacher and that's your teacher. But in secondary, I think it's almost more important. I think teenagers really, really need that sort of relationship with the teachers. And, they just spoke again and again about that one teacher and literally that one teacher who believed in them, who listened, or a moment of kindness that shifted their whole experience of school. And that's really stayed with me because you think, wow, and I said at the beginning, but wow, what a difference you can make by just doing something you might think is small and just your everyday and makes a massive, massive difference. And I think it reminded me why strategies really matter, but more importantly, why connection matters even more, and just understanding and listening, properly listening to teenagers and really trying to understand where they're coming from. Because we know that they thrive, don't they, when they feel seen, when they feel heard, when they feel valued. And yeah,
Yeah.
that's all they really want.
It almost feels like it should be built into schemes of work at the beginning of the year that you have that timetable to get to know your
Definitely.
students.
I know, because you're so
Because
rushed, aren't you? And
yeah,
it's nobody's fault. It's just the way the
mm,
curriculum is. It's so packed and
yeah,
you're trying to get through everything and you just desperately want to get
absolutely.
to know them and it makes such a difference.
Yeah. So my last question, I suppose, is to kind of pull everything together and look ahead. Um, you can mention the white paper if you want to, it's up to you, or not. But despite all of the challenges that we've talked about, time poor, the landscape, um, students feeling challenged in the classroom, sensory issues, what gives you the hope about the future of SEND support? And I'm sure we have got some very overwhelmed teachers
Yeah.
joining us today. What message would you like to share with them?
I think what gives me hope is, despite everything, if we think about what's actually happening on the ground in classrooms in the real world,
Yeah.
there is a big growing awareness of SEND. There's no doubt about it. People are much more aware of neurodivergence, of how to support learners. And let's face it, teachers are absolutely wonderful. We know that, they're seeking more training. They're wanting to collaborate more with parents. They're wanting to learn more about neurodivergence and support young people. Um, they've been really engaged in sort of the reforms we know as well and wanting to sort of shape the conversation. And I would say with the reforms at the moment that the SEND white paper or the school's white paper with the SEND reforms within it isn't going through a consultation period. So it's a really good opportunity for us to go on the government website and say what we think and sort of help make the change that we want. But I do really feel like we are shifting to being more neuroaffirming. So really
Mm.
changing that sort of way that we support learners with neurodivergence as opposed to trying to get them to fit into how we want them to be. We're being more flexible. I do think that's happening. and we're trying to understand students a lot more. And I think there's some amazing schools out there, absolutely brilliant, who are really looking at being a little bit more unique within, and I get it, within the curriculum restraints, but being a bit more unique, celebrating difference, and supporting learners as best they can. And, I appreciate everyone's overwhelmed. And the thought of more workload coming if these reforms don't have the capacity building around them feel really challenging. And I get that. And you're navigating quite a complex system whilst trying to support young people day in, day out, which is really hard. But I think the thing I would say is like those small steps really matter. Those small little tweaks that you're already doing will be making a massive difference to learners in your classroom without you even realizing. You'll be that teacher to somebody,
Mm.
if not hundreds of children, perhaps.
Yeah.
They remember you, that's why they stop you in Tesco and say, "Hi, sir," because
Or
you're
just
that
shout your name
person to
out.
them. Yeah, and it makes a massive difference, doesn't it? And it's
Yeah.
not just, like I said, a difference to how to their school life, but their entire life. And yeah,
Definitely.
such
And
an
I think
important
also
job.
the new generation of young people are more accepting of difference and more
Yeah,
educated in difference and more
absolutely.
tolerant of it. And I
Yeah,
think trying all of these amazing tips that you've shared today, I think a lot of students would want to get on board with that and almost
yeah,
go, yeah, let's give that a go. And
yeah.
not, I don't think there'd be many kids out there, I hope. I'm sure some of the teachers on this call would disagree with me, but that would see it as a big deal if someone was wearing ear defenders or
No,
something. It's
exactly.
just that's what that person needs. And I think that is a big shift that I've
Yeah, and then
certainly
it'll be a
noticed.
societal shift, hopefully, won't it, in
Yeah,
the workplace? Because
I'll
then
feed through.
nobody will think anything of somebody needing to use a standing desk, or
Yeah.
because a lot of nobody grows out of neurodivergence. It's a lifelong thing. So they might need to use headphones, or all of the. It's like we're helping teenagers in a sense build this toolkit for life of things, strategies
Mm.
that help them when they go off into the big wide
Yeah.
world. And I think
It
that's
starts
quite
here, doesn't it?
empowering, isn't it, to think that we can
Definitely.
help them that way.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Thank you. So we do have a couple of questions. So we'll just pop over to the Q&A box if that's okay. So Joe would like to know a bit about homework and revision. So she asks, I think it's a she, sorry. Um, Homework and revision, building that independence can be particularly challenging for students with
Yeah.
anxiety or executive functioning differences. What advice would you give,
Yeah,
basically?
it hugely challenging. So there's a whole chapter in the book on organization and concentration because I appreciate that's like even though it's not a specific area of need, when you're a secondary school teacher,
Yeah.
it is an area of need, or if you're a parent of a teenager, it actually is. Trying to help them get organized. And we all know the students, don't we? We've probably got them in our head, and I've still got the ones I've taught in my head, the ones that really do find remembering homework, remembering their equipment to school, like, and also then organising the revision and actually even knowing how to revise can be really difficult. I
Mm,
think having set routines, working with families is huge, like sort of that collaboration, so families know what to expect and how they can support them. Because you'll find if you're struggling to get them to revise, the family's probably having an even bigger battle at home around it. Um, so things like, yeah, consistent sort of homework or revision timetables of what they should be doing, maybe like a visual checklist so they can keep track of what they've done and what they haven't. There's a lot of it is stuff that we do as adults, and we forget that kids need it as well sometimes. So, like, I need a checklist, like to function in day-to-day life. I have a checklist every day, and I tick it off and say what jobs I've done. Let's do the same with learners, so they can keep track of what they've done and what they need to do. There are amazing apps out there. Now, I didn't recommend any in the book because I figured by the time the book came out, there'd be a whole swathe of new apps and it'd be out of date. But there's even just the simple ones on their phone, like reminders, or
yeah.
I'm sure they can find better ones than that. But timers, reminders, all of these, there's lots of apps that can really help learners. So if they love their phone, which let's face it, they do, maybe we can help them use their phone for good with like reminders and help them plan their revision that way. But I
Amazing.
think it's, yeah, establishing those routines, making sure we're checking things at the same time. Yeah, all of that sort of routine, scheduling it out, setting it out, and being so consistent with them and not dropping the ball with them, and the parents being the same so that you can really help support them. Yeah, and having a check-in as well with you so that if they're able to check in with a trusted adult to say where they're up to so you can help reorganize if they're struggling.
Mhm.
um, Breaking tasks down into smaller sections so that it doesn't feel as overwhelming because and revision can feel hugely overwhelming, but breaking it down into this is what you do this day, this is what you do this day, this is what you do
Mhm.
this day, I think can be helpful. So yeah, just being consistent, compassionate, and sometimes we even have to teach these organizational skills explicitly, like really explicitly, and this is how we organize and this is what we do, and not presume that they understand this inferred sort of organization, because some neurodivergent children in particular might not be aware of what we mean by get how to get organized. It might seem a little bit abstract,
Yeah,
but there's a
brilliant.
whole chapter.
That's amazing. This sounds like there's loads in there. Okay, I think we've got time for a couple more. Um, Hayley would like to know a bit about kind of the diagnosis journey, I suppose. She wants to know if GPs are involved in diagnoses or whether there's screenings and no diagnosis needed. It's a minefield, isn't it?
Yeah, it can, and it can be different for different areas, can't it? So some, yeah, GP, you can, parents can take their children to a GP and the GP can then flag them to different ways to get a diagnosis. My advice is always to go to the SENDCO because the SENDCO often has a better understanding of the local area and which ways you assess for different things in your local
Mm,
area. So that would be the best first point of call. It is different for different local authorities for different areas, and it's probably going to get even more complicated. Um, but yeah, and in terms of screening, so we can do whole school dyslexia screening, for example, can't we? But then some after that screening can be tricky because then after that it's then do you go and get a diagnosis for that child, and some local authorities
yeah.
don't even do dyslexia diagnosis anymore, so some parents go private. It's a minefield, isn't it? And I think I'm probably
Mm,
not answering the question very well because it's so varied and so different depending on where you are and what your school does. But yeah, the SENCO is your best point of call.
okay, thank you. And then someone who's in a similar situation to me actually is working online with students. Sorry, me and my last role that I was talking about, I meant when I was in college. She's working on, she or he, sorry if you're a he, I'm working online with students and new to my post. How do you deal with mute students during lessons who have had a bad experience in mainstream schools? So there's a couple of things there, isn't there? It's online teaching, which is
Yeah.
a minefield. I remember doing that during COVID. That was fun.
Yeah, same. I'm just
Um,
bringing flashbacks there, Sarah.
but then I suppose the second half of that question is how do you overcome previous bad experiences of
Yeah.
school?
And I suppose if it is situational mutism, so where a child is or a young person is struggling to communicate in different situations, we've got to remember that situational mutism is anxiety based. So I think if they aren't talking to you during lessons or you're struggling to get them to respond, we perhaps need to start from a place of building the relationship up first even more. So I would sort of, and I appreciate when you've got the pressure of potentially the parents wanting you to make progress, it's quite tricky, isn't it? But I think you need some time to sort of help build that relationship up, play some games, even if you can online with them, just something that makes it more accessible for them initially, so you can get over that, but hopefully get over that sort of anxiety they might have about the sessions and what they've experienced in school that's making them find it very incredibly difficult to access learning. There's a lot to be undone there, isn't there, in a sense, if they've, which it sounds like they've sort of had emotionally based school non-attendance perhaps, and
Mhm.
they're really struggling with that. So I think there's a lot of relationship building and sort of trust that needs to come with that. And I imagine they're doing a brilliant job already doing that. But also giving choice and different flexibility on how you can engage in the sessions. I've taught autistic learners online who haven't wanted to sit on the camera with me at all. And it's not being offended about that. It's just how they wanted to learn. And eventually they probably will come to you and you will get that relationship. But being flexible, but also being consistent that you're always going to be there, you're always going to turn up, you're going to
Yeah.
just keep going and eventually you'll get them. But yeah, different ways they can contribute, perhaps. Maybe they can use visuals instead. Maybe they can type in the chat. Like we don't always have to communicate with words. So yeah, try and be a little bit a bit more flexible. See if you can come up with some ideas that way. There's some quizzes. There's lovely. Sorry, we've got me chatting. Whoever this
It's
anonymous
fine.
attendee is, they've got me chatting. But like, you know, what's the thing you can get where you can put, you can do a slide and you can get the words to come up on the screen when people contribute. Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean, Sarah? Where what's the word? And they can type and they can join in
I know
different
what
ways,
you
basically.
mean. Yeah, I used to use something called Mentimeter. I
That's
don't
the
know if
one,
it's is
Mentimeter,
that
yeah.
it?
Things
Yeah,
like that where they can
yeah.
join in a different way. So they don't have to just talk on the screen, but they can
Takes
answer
the
the chat
pressure off, doesn't
stuff.
it?
Yeah, like quizzes
Mm,
that could come up on the screen or
mm,
um yeah, there's lots of different ways I think you can do that, but I bet
mm.
they've tried loads. So keep going. I bet you're
Brilliant.
doing a brilliant job.
Yes, thank you. Right, we're going to have to stop that. I'm so
Oh,
sorry. I feel like we could carry on. We really could. Thank you so much for your time, Georgina.
no, my pleasure.
Um, Remember, everybody, you will get the recording sent out for tomorrow. So do look out for that, and please feel free to share that with colleagues as it comes through. When you come out of the webinar, everyone, you will get a very short survey that will pop up, and we would really, really appreciate it if you could complete that survey. Feedback is so important to us. I'm really sorry if I didn't get to your questions today. We just ran out of time because Georgina had so many amazing ideas.
And I'm too
But
chatty.
it's fine, it's great. If you do have any further burning questions for Georgina that we haven't got to today, when you're completing your surveys though, please pop the question and your email address in that box and we will get those to Georgina and get back to you. So her work is not finished, hopefully. I'm sure there'll be even more
Love
questions
it.
for her. So please don't forget, everybody, Georgina's new book, Send Strategies for the Secondary Years, is officially out on March the 12th. So make sure you get your pre-orders in or grab a copy next week. And if you've enjoyed the webinar today, do be sure to check out the rest of Educate's Spring Teacher webinars. So I think we've got 2 left. You can find out more details on the Educate website. We've got a parent-focused one actually. So just direct your parents to this one. They can get some advice on how to support their students, their children, and also on revision methods, which we obviously touched on a bit today. So please do check those out. A massive thank you to Georgina for joining us today and for sharing such real actionable but also really heart-led advice.
Oh, thank you.
And of course, I just want to say thank you to everyone on this call for joining us. Your time is so precious. We fully appreciate that. We've been there. And for the incredible work you all do every day in your classrooms and homes, supporting these amazing young people. So thanks, Georgina. Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
And have a great evening, everyone. Take care. Bye.